I was halfway through my coffee when the plumber called and said, "Come home now, but come alone." The cup slipped in my hand and hit the saucer harder than it should have. The sound carried across the room, sharp against the low murmur of the coffee shop on Pine Street. I did not move right away. I just stared at the dark surface of the coffee, watching the ripples settle, as if that might steady something inside me that had already shifted. Ray Collins had been working on the house for 3 days. "A minor leak," he said. "Old pipes. Nothing unusual for a place built in 1987. He was not the kind of man who spoke in half-sentences or urgency. "What is it, Ray?" I asked, keeping my voice level. I noticed my fingers tightening around the phone, the tendons along my wrist standing out. "I found something behind the wall in your wife's office," he said. A pause. Then, quieter. "It is not part of the original structure." My chest tightened before I could stop it. Margaret's office. Even now, 11 months after she was gone, I still measured the house by that room. I had not changed anything in there. Not the chair, not the desk, not even the stack of lavender stationery she kept aligned at a precise angle. I could still smell it sometimes. That faint, clean scent she carried with her, even at the end. I closed my eyes for a second. The air in the coffee shop felt thinner. "I will be there," I said. "Give me 10 minutes. "Sir," Ray added, his voice catching slightly. "Do not bring anyone else." The line went quiet after that. I stood up too quickly, the chair legs scraping against the floor. A few people looked up. I left a $5 bill next to the receipt without checking the total. The walk to my car felt longer than usual. The late afternoon air had that early fall edge to it. Cool, but not cold. The kind of air Margaret used to say meant the year was turning whether we were ready or not. I got into the driver's seat and sat there for a moment, my hands resting on the steering wheel. This was wrong. The leak had been simple. Contained. Ray had said so himself. Something had changed. I started the engine and pulled out onto Pine Street, merging into traffic without thinking about it. The drive home usually took 12 minutes. I made it in 9. I noticed that. I noticed numbers like that. It is what I did for 42 years. Structures, load paths, stress points, patterns. Things either fit or they did not. When I turned onto my street, I saw Ray's truck still parked in the driveway, the back doors open, tools laid out with the kind of order that told me he had not packed up. He was waiting. I parked along the curb instead of pulling in. Habit or caution? I could not tell which. The house looked the same as it always had. White siding, dark shutters, the front porch light already on, even though the sun had not fully set. Margaret had installed a timer years ago. She liked consistency. I stepped out of the car and closed the door quietly. The gravel under my shoes sounded louder than it should have. As I walked up the driveway, I felt it again. That pull in my chest. Not fear. Not exactly. Something closer to recognition. Like seeing a crack in a beam where there should not be one. Small, but definitive. Ray met me at the front door before I could reach for the handle. His face looked different. Not panicked. Not confused. Focused, but tight around the eyes. "Thank you for coming back so fast," he said. I nodded. "Show me." He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then stepped aside to let me in. The house was quiet. Too quiet. No television. No background noise. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the distant tick of the hallway clock Margaret had insisted we keep even after it started running 3 seconds fast every hour. We walked down the hall together. I noticed everything. The way the light fell across the hardwood floor. The slight shift in temperature as we passed the vent near the ceiling. The door to her office was already open. That, more than anything, made my stomach tighten. I stopped just short of the threshold. The room looked exactly as I had left it. The desk, the chair, the framed photograph of us from 1998, taken at a lake 200 miles north, the summer before everything began to change. I stepped inside. The lavender scent was still there. Faint. Familiar. My throat closed for a moment, and I had to steady myself with one hand on the edge of her desk. Not now. I could not afford that now. "It is over here," Ray said quietly. He moved toward the far wall, near the built-in shelving unit Margaret had used for her files. I followed, my steps measured. Deliberate. He pointed to a section of drywall about 4 feet wide, just to the right of the shelves. At first glance, it looked the same as everything around it. Same color. Same texture. But I saw it. The seam. A line so fine most people would have missed it entirely. I stepped closer, leaning in slightly. The paint line was off by less than an eighth of an inch. The alignment with the baseboard was imperfect by maybe a quarter inch. It was not part of the original construction. I knew that immediately. I felt my breath slow, my mind shifting into that familiar, analytical space I had relied on for decades. This was something built later. Something concealed. When I opened the wall to get to the pipe, Ray said, his voice low, "This panel came loose." He reached out and pressed gently against the seam. The section of wall moved inward with a soft, controlled give. Not broken. Designed. My hand hovered in the air for a second before I placed it flat against the surface. The drywall felt cooler than the rest of the room. I pushed. The panel shifted further, revealing a dark space behind it. I did not step back. I leaned in, just enough to see the outline of something inside. A box. Wooden. Polished. Sitting perfectly centered in the hidden cavity, as if it had been waiting. My chest tightened again, sharper this time. Margaret had stood in this room every night at 9 o'clock for 15 years. Closed this door. Locked it. I had never asked why. I had trusted the routine. Trusted her. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. "I did not touch it," Ray said behind me. "I thought, you should be the one." I nodded slowly, my eyes fixed on the box. The edges were smooth. The surface dark, almost black in the dim light. Mahogany, if I had to guess. 12 inches across. Heavy. Deliberate. I reached forward, my fingers stopping just short of the edge. Something in my chest gave way, just slightly, like a support beam under too much load. 11 months. I had spent 11 months believing I understood how she died. Believing I had seen everything there was to see. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them again. My hand moved the last inch. Just before my fingers touched the wood, Ray spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, there is something else behind it." I did not pull my hand back when Ray said that, but something inside me shifted, the way it does when a structure carries more weight than it was designed for. I held my position there in Margaret's office, staring at that dark space behind the wall, and for a moment I was not in the present anymore. I was standing in this same room years earlier, watching her at her desk at exactly 9 o'clock at night. That had been her time. Every evening, without exception, she would finish whatever we were doing, excuse herself with a quiet, "I need a few minutes," and disappear into this room. She would close the door. Lock it. Always lock it. I had noticed that detail early on. The sound of the latch clicking into place. It became part of the rhythm of the house. At first, I asked about it. Not out of suspicion, but curiosity. She smiled the way she always did when she had already decided what she would and would not explain. "It is just paperwork," she told me. "Things I need to keep organized." That was enough for me then. I had spent my life trusting systems that made sense. Margaret was one of those systems. Precise. Consistent. Reliable. If something appeared ordinary long enough, you stopped questioning it. That is how patterns work. That is how you miss the one detail that matters. I stepped fully into the room now, moving past Ray, my hand sliding along the edge of her desk, as if I needed the contact to stay grounded. The surface was exactly as she had left it. The pen aligned parallel to the blotter. The stack of lavender stationery, untouched, each sheet squared to the corner with a precision that would have impressed any engineer. I picked up the top sheet without thinking. The scent was still there. Faint, but unmistakable. It hit me harder than I expected. My throat closed, and for a second I could not breathe properly. I set the paper back down too quickly, the edge misaligned by maybe half an inch. I corrected it immediately. She would have noticed that. She noticed everything. That was one of the things I loved about her. One of the things I never questioned. She kept this room the same for years? Ray asked quietly from behind me. I nodded. 15 years, I said. My voice sounded different to me. Thinner. Every night. 9 o'clock. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It still ran 3 seconds fast every hour. I had never fixed it. She said it reminded her that perfection was an illusion. I swallowed and looked back at the wall. At the seam. At the hidden space I had never known existed. This was wrong. Not because it was hidden. People have private things. Even in a marriage. But because of how long it had been there. 15 years. That meant it was part of the structure. Not an afterthought. Not a reaction. A plan. My mind moved through the years without asking permission. The last 2 years especially. That was when things had shifted. Not dramatically. Nothing obvious. Just small adjustments. Margaret had started handling the finances more directly. That had never been unusual in itself. We had always shared responsibilities. But she began insisting on reviewing statements alone, closing her laptop when I walked into the room, answering questions with general answers instead of specifics. At the time, I told myself it was stress. We were both getting older. She had mentioned feeling tired more often. I accepted that explanation because it fit within the pattern I expected. I see that now. I walked slowly toward the shelving unit, my eyes tracing the spines of folders that had not been moved in months. Each one labeled in her handwriting. Clean. Exact. 2008, 2009, 2010. The sequence stopped 3 years ago. That caught my attention. I leaned in closer. There were no folders for the last 36 months. Nothing labeled. Nothing filed. That did not match her behavior. Not at all. My hand hovered over the empty space, then dropped to my side. Did anyone else come by today? I asked Ray. Anyone asking about the work? He shook his head. No, sir. Just me. I got here at 8 this morning. Started on the pipe behind this wall around 5:15 this afternoon. That is when the panel shifted. I nodded, absorbing that. 5:15. I checked my watch out of habit. It was now 6:32. 77 minutes between discovery and the call. He had waited. Or he had taken time to decide what to do. Either way, he had not touched the box. That mattered. I turned slightly, looking toward the front of the house through the open doorway. That was when I saw it. A car parked across the street. Dark blue. Familiar. Ethan's. My chest tightened again, sharper this time, and I felt the air leave my lungs in a slow, controlled exhale. He was not supposed to be here. Not unannounced. Not at this time of day. He had called me 2 days ago, said he was busy with a closing, said he would stop by next week. I stepped toward the window, keeping my movement steady, deliberate. From this angle, I could see the driver's side clearly. The door was closed. No movement inside, but the engine heat shimmered faintly above the hood. He had arrived recently. I felt something settle into place inside me then. Not fear. Not anger. Recognition. The kind that comes when separate details begin to align into a single structure. Margaret's late nights. The missing files. The hidden compartment. And now my son, sitting across the street without telling me he was there. I turned back toward Ray, my expression steady. Stay here, I said quietly. Do not touch anything. He nodded immediately. I walked out of the office, down the hallway, and toward the front door, each step measured, my mind already mapping the next move. As I reached for the handle, I heard Ray's voice behind me, tighter now than before. Sir, that panel was installed from the inside. I did not answer Ray. I opened the front door and stepped outside, closing it behind me with a quiet click that felt louder than it should have. The evening air had cooled another degree, enough that I could feel it against my face as I walked down the driveway without looking back. Ethan's car sat across the street exactly where I had seen it, angled slightly toward the curb. Engine off now, no one visible inside. I did not slow down. I kept walking past my own mailbox, past the edge of my property, and turned left as if I had somewhere else to be. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. The driver's side door opened. Good. He had been waiting. I reached the end of the block and continued another 30 yards before I heard the engine start behind me. I did not turn around. I just kept walking, counting steps the way I used to on construction sites when I needed to measure distance without tools. 32 steps to the corner. Another 40 to the stop sign. I stopped there, looked both ways, and then crossed the street. By the time I reached my car, Ethan's vehicle had already passed me, heading toward the main road. I got in, closed the door, and waited exactly 3 seconds before starting the engine. Not enough to look like I was following. Enough to keep him within range. This was not something I had planned. Not something I had ever needed to do before. But patterns are patterns. Movement is structure. If he was leaving my street at this time, after what I had just found, then there was a connection. I pulled out slowly, turned onto the main road, and kept 2 cars between us. He drove the way he always did. Slightly above the speed limit, confident, never checking his mirrors for long. I had noticed that years ago when I taught him to drive. You are not the only variable on the road, I had told him. He had nodded. He always nodded. He did not always listen. We moved through 3 lights without stopping. At the 4th, traffic slowed. I eased back, letting a pickup truck slide between us. My hands were steady on the wheel. That surprised me. Everything else felt like it was shifting, but my hands were steady. I focused on that. On the small details. The spacing between cars. The timing of the lights. The distance. 3.2 miles from my house to Riverside Plaza. I knew that without checking a map. I had driven it often enough over the years. He turned into the lot without signaling. Another habit. I followed at a distance, turning in through the second entrance instead of the first. Riverside Plaza was half full at this hour. A grocery store on one end, a pharmacy on the other, and a row of smaller units in between. I saw his car pull up near Unit 14. He parked facing outward, ready to leave quickly. That detail did not escape me. I parked 2 rows back, angled slightly, so I had a clear line of sight without being obvious. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, watching. My pulse had settled into something slower now. Controlled. Focused. This was wrong. I knew that. But it was also necessary. I reached for my phone and opened the camera without thinking about it. No sound. No flash. Just a quiet tool in my hand. Ethan stepped out of the car first. He checked his phone, then looked toward the storefront. A few seconds later, Claire came out of the building. She was carrying a folder. Dark blue. Thick. She walked directly to him. No hesitation, no greeting that I could see from this distance. Just purpose. They stood close together, speaking in low tones. I could not hear them from here, but I did not need to. Not yet. I watched their hands. The way Claire held the folder. The way Ethan reached for it. There was no surprise in his movement. No question. He knew what it was. He took the folder, flipped it open briefly, and nodded. I zoomed in slightly with the phone, keeping my movements minimal. The label on the tab came into focus just enough for me to read it. Q for trust. My chest tightened again, sharper this time. Trust. That word had always meant something specific in our family. Structure. Protection. Continuity. Margaret had insisted on that. You do not build something unless you intend it to last, she used to say. I held the phone steady and recorded. 1 minute. 2 minutes. I counted without looking at the timer. Their conversation continued, low and controlled. Claire pointed to something inside the folder. Ethan nodded again, then closed it and tucked it under his arm. They were not arguing. They were not surprised. This was routine. That realization landed harder than anything else. Routine meant repetition. Repetition meant planning. I felt something in my chest give way for a second, like a joint under pressure. 40 years. I pressed my lips together and focused on the frame in front of me. Stay with what is real. Stay with what can be seen. Claire stepped back first, adjusting the strap of her bag. Ethan said something I could not hear, and she responded with a small, tight smile. Then she turned and walked back toward the storefront. Ethan remained where he was for another few seconds, then glanced around the lot. His eyes moved across the parked cars, scanning without appearing to scan. He had learned something, at least. I lowered the phone slightly, keeping it angled toward him. The distance between us was about 20 feet now, close enough that if he looked directly at me, he might recognize the car. I shifted slightly in my seat, just enough to break the direct line. He looked past me, then back toward his car. That was when I heard footsteps approaching from my left. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the edge of a uniform. A security guard, middle-aged, average build, walking with the kind of purpose that comes from routine authority. He stopped a few feet from my window and looked directly at me. His expression was not hostile. Not yet. Just curious. Measured. He tapped lightly on the glass with 2 fingers. I lowered the window halfway. Evening, he said. His tone was calm, but there was something under it. You are not allowed to film here. I lowered the window just enough to meet the guard's eyes, keeping my voice steady. I am not filming, I said. It was not entirely true, but it was close enough to pass. He held my gaze for a second longer than necessary, then glanced past me toward the row of shops. Ethan was already getting back into his car. The guard exhaled slowly, as if deciding something. Then you should probably leave, he said. This place closes early. I nodded once, raised the window, and started the engine without looking back at him. By the time I pulled out of the lot, Ethan's car was already merging onto the road ahead. I did not follow him this time. I had what I needed. Or at least, I had enough to know I was no longer dealing with assumptions. The drive home felt different. The road was the same, the distance unchanged, but the structure beneath everything had shifted. I could feel it in the way my thoughts moved. Not scattered, not emotional, focused, sequential, like reading. A set of blueprints where one line does not align with the rest. You do not ignore it. You trace it back to the source. I did not go inside the house when I returned. I sat in the car for a moment, hands resting on the wheel, replaying what I had seen. The folder, the label, the timing, Margaret's office, the hidden compartment, Ethan's presence across the street. None of those details stood alone anymore. They formed a pattern. And patterns, once visible, do not disappear. I started the engine again and pulled away from the curb. There was only one place to go next. Graves and Holt had been Margaret's choice, not mine. 22 years ago, she had insisted we move our estate planning there. They think long-term, she had said. Not just for now. I had agreed without much discussion. That was how most of our decisions worked. She saw further ahead than I did in certain areas. I trusted that. I arrived at the office at exactly 9 o'clock the next morning. The building was quiet, glass doors reflecting a pale morning light that made everything look sharper than it felt. I stepped inside, the sound of my shoes on the polished floor echoing slightly in the open lobby. The receptionist recognized me immediately. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, standing. "Miss Graves is expecting you." Of course she was. I nodded and followed her down the hallway, past framed certificates and photographs that had not changed in years. Stability. That was what this place represented. Or at least, what it was supposed to represent. Lillian Graves was already standing when I entered her office. She had always been direct. No wasted movement. No unnecessary words. "Daniel," she said, gesturing toward the chair across from her desk. "You sounded urgent." I sat down without responding immediately. Instead, I placed the items from the box on her desk. The USB drive, the folded letter, the small ledger. Her eyes moved over them once, quickly, then settled on me. "Where did you get these?" she asked. "Margaret's office," I said. "Behind a wall." That was enough. She did not ask another question before reaching for the USB drive. She turned to her computer, inserted it, and began opening files with a precision that matched her reputation. I watched her face more than the screen. Small changes, subtle reactions. Those told me more than any numbers could. At 9:25, she stopped scrolling. Her hand rested on the mouse, but she did not move it. "These are transaction logs," she said. "Detailed, time-stamped, cross-referenced." She clicked once, bringing up a summary page. $312,000 transferred over 18 months. The number landed cleanly. No exaggeration. No uncertainty. Just fact. I felt my jaw tighten, but I did not speak. "The transfers are structured," she continued. "Not random. They follow a pattern. Smaller amounts at regular intervals, then larger consolidations." She turned the screen slightly, so I could see. The dates aligned in a way that was too consistent to ignore. I recognized the spacing immediately. This was not careless. This was engineered. "Who authorized them?" I asked. My voice sounded steady. That surprised me again. She did not answer right away. Instead, she opened another file. A scanned document. A signature block. She leaned closer, then exhaled slowly. "Ethan," she said. "He is listed as secondary executor on a revised trust document dated March 3rd. I stared at the screen, at the signature that looked exactly like his. The alignment. The pressure points. It was real. Not copied. Not forged. "He has known you his entire life," Lillian said quietly. 38 years before any of this began. That matters here. This is not an external actor. This is someone with full access and full knowledge of your structure. I nodded once. The words did not surprise me. The confirmation did. She clicked into another folder. Financial summaries. Notes. Cross-references. Then she paused again, this time longer. "There is more," she said. She opened a document labeled 2022 property loss. "This appears to be tied to a failed commercial investment." She scanned quickly. $275,000 lost in 2022. Personal exposure. Not covered by insurance. She glanced at me. "There is also a secondary note referencing $90,000 in outstanding debt." I felt something shift again, deeper this time. Not shock. Recognition. A triggering event. A point where pressure exceeded capacity. That was where structures failed. Or were forced to change. "This is when it started," she said. "The timing aligns. The first transfer appears 3 weeks after this loss." I looked back at the screen, tracing the dates in my mind. It fit. Too well. "And it does not stop at money," she added, her voice quieter. Now, she opened one final file. A set of notes. Not financial. Observational. These entries reference control language, she said. Statements about securing the estate before any external changes. Before remarriage. Before asset redistribution. She turned the screen fully toward me. Daniel, this is not just about recovering funds. This is about control. Authority over your assets. Your decisions. Your future. The words settled heavily in the room. Control. Not greed. Not desperation alone. Something more deliberate. Something personal. I sat back in the chair, the leather creaking softly under the shift in my weight. Margaret's voice came back to me then, clear and precise. If something does not fit, look again. I looked at the screen. At the numbers. At the dates. At the signature. It all fit now. Too cleanly. Too completely. Lillian closed the file slowly, her hand resting on the desk. There is one more detail, she said. And you are not going to like it. I did not respond. I did not need to. She met my eyes directly. There are medical annotations tied to these transactions. I did not look away from the screen when Lillian said that. But something inside me shifted again, quieter this time, like a small adjustment deep within a structure that changes how everything above it is carried. Show me, I said. My voice came out lower than I expected, but it held. She nodded once and opened another file, her movements precise, deliberate. Columns of data filled the screen. Dates. Times. Notes. Not financial this time. Medical. I leaned forward slightly, my eyes moving across the entries, searching for a pattern. It did not take long. These dates, I said, pointing to a cluster of entries. They align with her appointments. Lillian nodded. Yes, she said, but not all of them. Look at the spacing. I did. The entries did not match a standard schedule. They appeared in intervals that were too regular to be random, but not consistent enough to be routine care. Every 3 weeks. Then 2. Then 4. Adjusted. Controlled. My chest tightened as I traced the sequence backward in my mind. Margaret had started feeling tired around that time. Small things at first. Fatigue in the afternoons. A need to sit down more often. I had accepted it. Age. Stress. Those were reasonable explanations. They fit the pattern I expected. I see now how easily a pattern can be guided. What exactly am I looking at? I asked. Lillian clicked into a detailed view. Pharmacy logs, she said, linked to a secondary account. The name attached is Claire Whitaker. I felt my hand tighten on the edge of the desk. Not enough to move it. Just enough to feel the pressure. These are not prescriptions Margaret requested. Lillian continued. They are additions. Adjustments. Small changes over time. She paused, then added carefully, controlled dosing. I closed my eyes for a second. The room did not spin. It did not blur. Everything remained exactly as it was. That was the worst part. The clarity. 42 years. I opened my eyes again and looked back at the screen. The numbers did not change. They never do. How much? I asked. She did not misunderstand the question. She clicked back to the financial summary and pulled up a consolidated view. $312,000 confirmed, she said, her finger moving down the column. An additional $88,000 in pending transfers based on scheduled entries. She turned slightly toward me. That brings the total to $400,000. The number settled into place. Not vague. Not estimated. Exact. For $100,000. I nodded once, absorbing it. Show me the timing, I said. She adjusted the display again, overlaying the financial data with the medical entries. The pattern became clearer. Each cluster of transfers aligned with a cluster of notes. Not perfectly, not obviously, but consistently enough that it could not be ignored. 6 key dates, I said quietly, counting them as I moved down the screen. Each one corresponds to a reported decline in her condition. Lillian nodded. You are seeing it correctly, she said. This was not a single event. It was a progression. I leaned back slightly, my hand moving to my face without thinking. I pressed my fingers against my lips, feeling the tension there. 40 years. It had all been right in front of me, and I had not seen it. Not because it was hidden perfectly, because it was integrated into what I already believed. That realization landed harder than anything else. I lowered my hand and focused again. The routing, I said. Where did the money go? She opened another file. Account numbers. Transfers. A network of movements that branched and reconnected. Primary destination is a shell account registered under a limited liability structure, she said. The controlling signature traces back to Claire. She paused, then added, Ethan authorized the transfers. Claire managed the routing. I nodded slowly. Roles. Defined. Coordinated. This was not confusion. This was design. And Margaret, I said. What did she know? Lillian reached for the ledger from the box and opened it carefully, turning to a marked page. The handwriting was Margaret's. Clean. Precise. Undeniable. She slid it across the desk toward me. Initials, she said. EW appears next to each flagged entry. I looked down at the page. The letters were small, but deliberate. Not a note to herself. A marker. A signal. She had seen it. She had tracked it. My throat tightened again, sharper this time, and I had to swallow before I could speak. She knew, I said. It was not a question. Lillian did not answer immediately. Instead, she turned back to the screen and pulled up one final entry. A note. Not financial. Not medical. A single line attached to a date near the end of the sequence. Read this, she said. I leaned forward, my eyes moving across the text. The words were simple, direct. If something happens, follow the pattern. I felt my chest tighten in a way that was different from before. Not just grief. Not just shock. Recognition. She had left this. Not hidden randomly. Placed. Positioned. Waiting to be found. I exhaled slowly, my hand dropping back to the desk. The mahogany box sat there between us, silent, solid, carrying more weight than its size suggested. There is one more layer, Lillian said quietly. I looked up at her. Her expression had shifted slightly. Not uncertainty. Not hesitation. Something closer to caution. These medical entries reference 3 specific compounds, she continued. They are not inherently dangerous on their own, but in combination, over time, they can produce the symptoms you described. I held her gaze, not blinking. Which means? I asked. She did not soften the answer. She never had. It means this was intentional. The words settled into the room, heavier than any number she had given me. Intentional. Not accidental. Not mismanaged. Designed. I sat there for a moment, the silence stretching just long enough to register fully. Then I nodded once. Not in agreement. In acknowledgement. This was the structure now. This was the reality I had to work within. I looked back at the screen one more time, at the numbers, the dates, the initials. Everything aligned. Too cleanly to deny. What do we do next? I asked. Lillian closed the file slowly, her hand resting on the desk as she met my eyes. We proceed carefully, she said. Then she leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering just enough to carry weight. Because if they have come this far, Daniel, they are not finished yet. I returned home at 6:42 p.m., the house exactly as I had left it that morning, quiet in a way that felt different now that I understood what silence could hide. I did not turn on the lights right away. I moved through the hallway with the same measured pace I had used all day, each step deliberate, each sound accounted for. The clock on the wall read 6:44 p.m., still running 3 seconds fast every hour. Margaret had never fixed it. I had never corrected her. I stopped just outside the kitchen and took my phone from my pocket, opening the voice memo application I had downloaded months ago after reading an article about contract disputes. I set it to record, placed it face down on the narrow table near the doorway, and stepped back into the shadow of the hall where the light from the kitchen would not reach me directly. At 6:45 p.m., the front door opened. I heard Ethan's voice first, casual, familiar, the same tone he had used his entire life when he thought everything was under control. He is not here, he said. I told you he would not be. Claire's voice followed, quieter, but sharper. He came home yesterday earlier than usual, she said. We cannot assume patterns anymore. I felt something in my chest tighten, not sudden, not explosive, just a steady pressure building from the center outward. I pressed my hand lightly against the wall beside me, grounding myself in the physical space. Stay still. Stay quiet. Ethan moved further into the kitchen. I could hear the soft slide of paper against the countertop. It does not matter, he said. Everything is already in motion. Once the house transfer clears, it is done. There was a pause. Then Claire spoke again, her tone lower now. You said that 2 weeks ago. Ethan exhaled, a short, controlled sound. And I was right, he said. Look at the numbers. 312,000 already moved. Another 88 scheduled. That is 400,000 total. You think he is going to notice that now? I pressed my hand harder against the wall, my fingers spreading slightly against the painted surface. For 100,000. Hearing it in his voice, not as a discovery, but as confirmation, settled something inside me in a way nothing else had. This was not speculation. This was certainty. Claire stepped closer to him. I could hear it in the shift of her voice, the change in distance. The timing matters, she said. If anything shifts before the final transfer, it will not. Ethan interrupted. His voice was firmer now, more confident. She was already declining by the time we adjusted the dosage. By week 3, she did not even question it. The words landed cleanly. No hesitation. No doubt. I closed my eyes for a second, my hand moving from the wall to cover my mouth. 42 years. Every morning coffee. Every evening routine. It had all been right there, and I had not seen it. My chest tightened sharply, and for a moment I thought I might lose control of my breathing. I forced it back. In. Out. Slow. Controlled. Not now. Not here. I lowered my hand and listened. Claire spoke again, quieter now. We need to finish this before anything changes, she said. If he brings an outside review, he will not, Ethan said. There was a slight edge to his voice now, something closer to impatience. He has trusted us his entire life. 38 years. That does not disappear overnight. The number settled into place. 38 years. He said it like a fact, like an asset, like something he could leverage. I felt something inside me shift again, deeper this time, like a foundation settling under pressure. Trust, measured in years, reduced to a calculation. Claire did not respond immediately. When she did, her voice carried a different weight. This was never just about the money, she said. You know that. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, slower this time. More deliberate. No, he said. It was not. I leaned slightly closer to the doorway, careful not to let my shadow cross into the light. His next words came out steady, clear. It is about control. About making sure everything is secured before he changes anything. Before he decides to give it away or restructure it, or bring someone else into it. I felt my jaw tighten, my teeth pressing together just enough to register the tension. Control. Not desperation. Not panic. A decision. Claire exhaled slowly. Then we finish it, she said. Tonight, if possible. There was a soft sound, like paper being folded. Ethan moved again, his footsteps crossing the kitchen floor. We are close, he said. Closer than we have ever been. I could hear the confidence in his voice now, the certainty that comes when someone believes the outcome is already decided. I remained where I was, still, silent, the phone recording every word from less than 12 feet away. The air in the hallway felt heavier now, thicker, as if the house itself was holding something it had not released yet. I kept my breathing steady, my posture unchanged, my focus fixed on the space in front of me. This was the moment, the point where everything aligned, the pattern complete. Claire spoke one more time, her voice almost calm now. And he still does not suspect anything, she said. The words settled into the silence that followed, and for a second, no one moved. Then I heard a sound I had not expected. The faint creak of the hallway floor behind me. Not from the kitchen, from deeper in the house. I turned my head slowly, just enough to see the shadow at the end of the corridor shift as someone stepped into the light and said, Daniel? I did not answer the voice behind me. I did not turn fully toward it either. I simply reached down, picked up my phone from the table, and stopped the recording at exactly 6:47 p.m. 2 minutes and 11 seconds. Enough. More than enough. I slid the phone into my pocket, my movements controlled, deliberate, as if nothing unusual had happened. Then I stepped forward into the kitchen light. Ethan turned first. His expression shifted for a fraction of a second, something between surprise and calculation, before settling into something familiar. Controlled. Neutral. Claire followed, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in the space, the distance between us, the silence that had settled where their conversation had been. Dad. Ethan said, his tone adjusting midword. I did not hear you come in. I nodded once. I was here, I said. My voice held. Steady. I noticed that. I noticed everything now. I did not look at the papers on the counter. I did not look at the folder. I looked at him. 38 years. Every detail I had ever trusted now reassembled into something else entirely. Claire stepped back half an inch. Not much. Just enough to create space. We were just stopping by, she said, making sure everything was all right. I let the words sit in the air for a second. Then I nodded again. Everything is fine, I said. And I meant it. not in the way they understood, in the way I did. I moved past them, not toward the counter, not toward the evidence, but toward the hallway, away from the conversation, away from the moment they expected. I have an early morning tomorrow, I added, my tone even. I will see you both later. I did not wait for a response. I walked down the hall, my steps measured, my breathing steady, my mind already moving ahead of the moment I was leaving behind. Behind me, I heard Ethan shift his weight, the faint sound of paper being gathered. Claire said something too low for me to catch. Then the front door opened. Closed. The house returned to silence. I stood in Margaret's office for a long moment after that, the mahogany box still open on the desk, the lavender scent faint but present. I did not touch anything. Not yet. There was a sequence to follow now. A structure. And I knew exactly where the next step had to happen. The courthouse opened at 8:30 in the morning. I arrived at 8:23. 7 minutes early. Enough time to stand outside, to feel the cool air settle into something steady inside me, to let the weight of what I was carrying align into something precise. When the doors opened, I stepped inside without hesitation. The clerk's office was already active, low voices, the sound of papers moving, the quiet rhythm of a system designed to process things without emotion. I approached the counter and placed the folder in front of the woman behind it. She looked up, her expression professional, neutral. "How can I help you?" she asked. "I need to file an emergency injunction," I said. My voice did not waver. I slid the documents forward. Asset protection. Immediate freeze. She glanced down at the top page, her eyes scanning the header, the names, the figures. I watched her process it, the way her posture shifted slightly as the details registered. "For $100,000? She said quietly. "Yes," I replied. She nodded once, reached for a stamp, and pressed it firmly onto the paper. The sound echoed slightly in the space between us. "Case number A-44721, she said, writing it across the top. "This will be reviewed today." I nodded, then reached into my pocket and placed my phone on the counter. "There is also an audio file," I said. 2 minutes and 11 seconds. It is labeled and time-stamped. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then took the device carefully, setting it beside the documents. "We will log this as supporting evidence," she said. I watched her write it down, each letter precise, each number exact. This was no longer a conversation. This was a record, a system, a structure that did not rely on trust. That mattered. I stepped back from the counter, my hands at my sides, my posture unchanged. For the first time since the call from the plumber, I felt something settle into place. Not relief. Not yet. But alignment. The next step had been taken. It could not be undone. I turned toward the exit, ready to leave, when the clerk spoke again, her voice slightly lower now. "Sir," she said. I paused, looking back at her. She met my eyes directly, the professional distance in her expression replaced by something more immediate. "They have already been notified," she said. "If they choose to respond, it could be today." I reached my front door at exactly 5:58 p.m., the same quiet settling over the house as the night before, but this time it felt different. Not empty. Expectant. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and placed the mahogany box on the table in the living room where the light from the window caught the edge of its surface. I did not sit down. I did not turn on the television. I stood there, listening. At 6 p.m. sharp, the knock came. 2 firm taps. Measured. Controlled. I opened the door without hesitation. Ethan stood there, Claire just half a step behind him. He did not smile this time. Not immediately. "Dad," he said, his voice steady but tighter than usual. "We need to talk." I stepped back and let them in without a word. Claire moved first, her eyes scanning the room quickly, taking in the table, the box, the stillness. Ethan followed, closing the door behind him with a soft click. "You filed something this morning," he said. Not a question. A statement. I nodded once. "I did." He exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. "You are confused," he said, the words coming out carefully, as if he had already practiced them. "Since Mom passed, things have not been clear for you. We have been trying to help you manage that." Claire stepped forward, her tone softer, but no less deliberate. "You are making accusations based on incomplete information," she said. "There are explanations for everything you think you saw." I did not respond immediately. I walked past them, toward the table, and rested my hand lightly on the mahogany box. The surface felt cool under my fingers. Solid. Real. I turned back to face them. For $100,000, I said. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. 312 already moved. 88 scheduled. Ethan's expression shifted again, just slightly, the first real crack in the control he had been holding. That is not what you think, he said quickly. Those are structured reallocations. Tax positioning. You would understand that if you had all the information. I watched him as he spoke, noting the pace, the choice of words, the way he avoided specifics. Patterns. Still patterns. Claire stepped in again. You have always trusted us to handle these things, she said. That has not changed. What has changed is your ability to see the full picture. I felt something tighten in my chest, sharper this time, and for a moment I pressed my hand against the edge of the table to steady myself. 42 years. I could hear Margaret's voice in the back of my mind, clear as ever. If something does not fit, look again. I lifted my hand from the table and opened the box. Slowly, deliberately. The hinge made a soft sound as it moved. Inside, the documents lay exactly as I had left them. I took out the ledger and placed it on the table between us. She saw it, I said. Every entry. Every transfer. She marked them. Ethan's eyes flicked down to the page, then. Back up to me. That does not prove anything, he said. It proves she was reviewing the accounts. That is what she always did. I nodded once. Yes, I said. That is exactly what she did. I reached into my pocket and placed my phone on the table beside the ledger. The screen was already open. The file visible. 2 minutes and 11 seconds. Time-stamped. Labeled. Claire's eyes moved to it immediately. Ethan did not look at it right away. He kept his focus on me. What is that? He asked. I did not answer. I pressed play. The room filled with the sound of his own voice, steady and confident, echoing back the words he had spoken less than 24 hours earlier. 312,000 already moved. Another 88 scheduled. That is 400,000 total. The words hung in the air, undeniable, precise. Claire's posture shifted first. A small step back. Ethan's gaze dropped to the phone, then lifted again, slower this time. The confidence was still there, but something else had entered it. Calculation. Adjustment. You recorded us, he said. Not accusation. Recognition. I nodded once. Yes. There was a pause. Not long. Just enough for the structure of the moment to settle. Then Ethan straightened slightly, his expression tightening into something firmer. That does not change anything, he said. His voice was lower now, more controlled. You think a recording like that is going to hold up? You think you understand what you are dealing with here? Claire stepped forward again, her tone sharper this time. You are making this worse for yourself, she said. There are legal consequences to what you have done. Filing claims like this without full understanding. I raised my hand slightly, not to interrupt, but to stop the flow of words. She did. Immediately. I looked at both of them, my gaze steady, my voice even. This is no longer a conversation, I said. It is a process. Ethan held my gaze for a second longer, then let out a slow breath. When he spoke again, his words came out more direct than before. You think you have control now, he said. You do not. The statement settled into the room, heavier than anything else he had said. Claire did not speak this time. She just watched me, her expression unreadable. I stood there, the box open, the ledger end. The phone between us, the entire structure of the last 2 years laid out in a way that could not be ignored anymore. My hand rested lightly on the edge of the table, steady despite everything moving beneath it. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ethan took a step closer, his voice dropping just enough to carry weight. You really believe this ends here? He said. I did not answer him. I held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then reached forward and closed the lid of the mahogany box with a soft, deliberate click. The sound carried through the room more than it should have. Final. Controlled. I stepped back from the table, creating space not just between us, but between the moment and what came next. Ethan watched me carefully now, the certainty still there, but thinner, stretched across something he had not fully accounted for. Claire did not move at all. Her eyes stayed on the box. No, I said quietly. It does not end here. I turned toward the door and opened it without looking back. You should leave, I added. Neither of them argued. That was the first sign. They stepped past me into the evening air, their movements measured, their silence heavier than anything they had said inside. Ethan paused at the edge of the porch, his hand resting briefly on the railing. "This is not over," he said. The words were steady, but the timing was off. A fraction too late. I nodded once. "I know." Then I closed the door. The house settled into silence again, but this time it was different. Not empty. Not waiting. Resolved. The next morning, I stood in District Courtroom 3 at exactly 11 o'clock, the same file in my hand, the same numbers aligned in the same precise order. Lillian stood beside me, her posture unchanged, her presence steady. Across the room, Ethan and Claire sat at the opposite table, their expressions controlled, their movements minimal. The room itself felt neutral, almost detached from what it was processing. That was the nature of systems like this. They did not react. They evaluated. The judge entered at 11:02. We stood. Saturday. The process began. Lillian spoke first, her voice clear, structured, each point building on the last. $400,000. 312 transferred. 88 pending. Dates. Times. Signatures. Patterns. She did not rush. She did not emphasize. She simply laid the structure out exactly as it existed. I watched Ethan as she spoke. He listened without interruption, his eyes fixed forward, his expression unreadable. Claire glanced at the documents once, then back up, her posture tightening slightly with each detail. When the audio was played, the room shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. The judge leaned forward slightly. Ethan's jaw set. Claire's hands moved together, fingers interlacing once before settling again. The words sounded different in this room. Not louder, clearer, stripped of context, stripped of control. I felt something in my chest tighten again as the recording played, and for a moment I pressed my tongue against the roof of my mouth just to keep my breathing steady. 42 years. I did not look at them. I did not need to. When the recording ended, the silence that followed carried more weight than the sound had. The judge reviewed the documents for several seconds, then spoke. "The court orders an immediate freeze on all identified accounts totaling $400,000, he said. The words were simple, direct, final in a way that nothing else had been. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders lowering by a fraction of an inch. Not relief. Not yet. But something close to it. Lillian nodded once beside me, her hand resting lightly on the file. Additionally, the judge continued. This matter will be referred for further investigation based on the medical correlations presented. That was the second shift. Not financial. Structural. The scope expanding beyond what could be contained in numbers alone. I felt my chest tighten again, sharper this time, and for a moment I pressed my hand against the edge of the table in front of me. It had all been there. The patterns. The changes. The signals I had not followed soon enough. I closed my eyes for half a second, then opened them again. Stay with what is in front of you. The bailiff stepped forward, his presence quiet but firm, positioning himself slightly closer to Ethan and Claire. Not aggressive. Procedural. Ethan stood first, his movement controlled, his expression still holding on to something that had not fully collapsed yet. Claire followed, her posture straighter than before, her eyes no longer scanning the room, but fixed ahead. They did not look at me as they were guided toward the exit. That, more than anything, marked the change. The absence of eye contact. The break in the pattern that had held for 38 years. I remained where I was, my hands resting lightly on the table, my breathing steady again. The room began to shift back to its neutral state, the process moving on, the system absorbing what had just been decided. Lillian turned slightly toward me, her expression softer now, but still precise. "It is done," she said quietly. I nodded once. The words did not feel complete, but they were accurate. The structure had collapsed where it needed to. What remained would take time to settle. I gathered the documents slowly, aligning the edges out of habit, placing them back into the folder with the same care Margaret would have used. The motion steadied me, grounded me. When I finished, I looked up. Lillian was watching me, her gaze steady. "There is one final document," she said. Her voice was lower now, carrying a different weight than before. Margaret left it with instructions to be opened only after a court order was issued. She reached into her case and placed a sealed envelope on the table between us. My name was written across the front in Margaret's handwriting. Clean, precise, undeniable. I felt my breath catch, just slightly, as I reached for it. Lillian did not move. She did not speak. She simply watched as my fingers touched the edge of the paper. Then she said, quietly, "You should read it now." I did not open the envelope in the courtroom. I carried it home, holding it carefully in my left hand the entire drive, as if the weight of it might shift if I let my attention wander. By 4 p.m., I was back in Margaret's office, standing in the same place where the wall had opened, where the box had waited, where everything I thought I understood had begun to realign. The room looked exactly as it always had. The chair still angled slightly toward the desk. The pen still parallel to the blotter. The lavender scent still faint, but present. I closed the door behind me and locked it without thinking. The sound of the latch settling into place echoed in a way I had never noticed before. I walked to the desk and set the envelope down beside the mahogany box. My name was written across the front. In her handwriting. Clean. Precise. The way she always wrote when something mattered. I sat down slowly, the chair creaking under my weight, and rested my hands on the surface of the desk. They were steady. That surprised me. I had expected something else. A tremor. A hesitation. But there was none. I reached for the envelope and opened it carefully, sliding the paper out without tearing the edge. The letter inside was a single page. No corrections. No hesitation in the ink. I read the first line, and my breath caught before I could stop it. If you are reading this, then you followed the pattern. I paused, my eyes closing for a fraction of a second as her voice settled into the space around me. Not imagined. Remembered. Exact. I opened my eyes and continued. I knew something was wrong 18 months ago. I could not prove it then, but I could feel it. Small changes. Things that did not fit. You always trusted the structure. I learned to look at the gaps. My hand moved to the edge of the desk, my fingers resting against the wood as I read. She had seen it. Before I had. She had carried that knowledge alone. I kept reading. I marked what I could. I left what I could not explain. I knew you would understand the difference. I felt my throat tighten, and for a moment I pressed my lips together, forcing the breath back into a steady rhythm. 42 years. She had known exactly how I would think. Exactly how I would follow it. The next line was written slightly darker, as if she had pressed harder with the pen. This was never about the money. It was about control. I did not want them to take that from you. I sat back slightly in the chair, the words settling into me in a way nothing else had. Not anger. Not grief. Something else. Recognition. She had not just seen the pattern. She had protected the structure. I looked down at the page again. There was one more paragraph. If something happens to me, do not react immediately. Gather everything. Then act once. Precisely. That was her. Always. Not emotional. Not reactive. Exact. I lowered the letter slowly, my hand resting on the desk beside it. The room was quiet. The clock on the wall ticked, still running. 3 seconds fast every hour. I looked at it for a moment, then back at the desk, at the box, at the letter. Everything was in place now. Not as it had been. As it needed to be. I reached forward and placed the letter inside the mahogany box, aligning it with the ledger and the other documents. Then I closed the lid gently, my hand resting on the surface for a second longer than necessary. The weight of it felt different now. Not hidden. Not waiting. Complete. I stood up and moved toward the window, looking out across the street where Ethan's car had been parked the night before. The space was empty now. Just pavement. Just distance. I felt the tightness in my chest ease. Not all at once, but enough to notice. Grief did not leave. It never does. But it changes shape. It becomes something you can carry without it breaking the structure around it. I turned back toward the desk and adjusted the chair slightly, aligning it the way she would have. Parallel. Exact. I picked up the pen and set it down again, making sure it rested exactly where it belonged. Small details. They matter. They always have. I walked to the door, my hand resting on the handle for a moment before I opened it. The house beyond was quiet, but no longer uncertain. As I stepped into the hallway, I understood something I had not seen before. Trust is not the absence of doubt. It is the decision to build anyway. And when that structure fails, you do not abandon it. You rebuild it with what remains true. I closed the door behind me, leaving the office exactly as it should be. As I turned toward the kitchen, I heard a sound above me. A faint shift. Subtle but real. I stopped, listening. Then a voice called down from upstairs, unfamiliar, steady. "Sir, you might want to take a look at this."